Let's be real, we're all feeling it, right? The political division, it just feels like it's tearing everything apart. But what if I told you there's a framework, a way of looking at this that could help us understand and maybe even start to heal these huge divides? It comes from German philosophy and it is powerful. So let's get into it. You know that feeling when you're in a political conversation and it just feels broken? Like we're all just shouting into the void, not getting anywhere? Well, you're not alone. But what if this isn't just about people having different opinions? What if there's something deeper, something structural that's causing this breakdown? So the source material we're looking at has a name for this problem. It's called categorical narrowing. It's a bit of a mouthful, I know, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's what happens when any single political idea gets so walled off, so isolated, that it completely loses touch with other essential points of view. It becomes its own little echo chamber, 100% convinced it's the only truth. And that, right there, is where things start to go wrong. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to diagnose the division. What does it actually look like? Then, we'll get into the path to healing or reintegration by looking at 3 specific ideological poles. And finally, we'll see how this whole framework shows us a way to get from this constant state of political war to hopefully a state of peace. All right, let's kick things off with a proper diagnosis. This framework points to 3 core ideologies that, when they get pushed to their extremes, become really destructive. So this table breaks it all down. First up, you've got the self, which is associated with the liberal pole. When it gets extreme, it becomes this isolated I, and its driving force becomes what the source calls Gier, or just pure greed. Then there's the act, or the social pole. When that gets isolated, it's all about doing for the sake of doing, driven by Zwang, this intense compulsion. And finally, you have the being, the conservative pole. In its extreme form, it's an isolated state, totally driven by angst, a deep fear of anything impure or different. The key here is that when any one of these gets cut off from the others, it gets twisted into something toxic. So, if isolation is the disease, then what's the cure? Well, it's not what you might think. It's not about one side winning and destroying the others. The way forward, according to this framework, is all about reintegration. And this is absolutely crucial. The goal isn't for your side to win and just wipe out the others. I mean, that's what keeps the whole cycle of conflict going, right? No, the real healing path is to rebuild the bridges between these different poles, to reintegrate the very perspectives that have been lost. But how do you actually do that? It really comes down to 2 big mental shifts. First, you've got to develop a both-and mindset. That means actively trying to integrate the valid points from the other side. And second, you need to adopt a neither-nor stance. This is where you kind of float above it all, refusing to be trapped in any single box, so you can see the whole picture. It's about building the mental muscle to hold multiple, even conflicting truths at the same time. Okay, let's make this real. We're going to start our first healing journey with the isolated liberal pole. We'll look at how it can move from a mindset of plunder to one of genuine responsibility. The therapy for this absolute self happens in 2 steps. First, it needs to reintegrate the conservative idea of being. This helps the isolated I see that the world isn't just a pile of resources to be exploited, but a community you participate in. Then it has to reintegrate the social idea of the act. And that brings home the fact that your actions have consequences for other people, shifting the focus from just taking what you want to thinking about fairness for everyone. And this quote just nails the end goal. A healthy, integrated person still loves freedom, of course, but now that freedom is balanced. It's not just freedom from rules, it's freedom to act responsibly and contribute to the community. All right, on to our second case. Let's look at the social pole. This is the journey from the tyranny of trying to force change on everyone to the more subtle art of enablement. You're going to see a similar pattern here. The healing happens in 2 steps. By reconnecting with the conservative idea of being, that frantic impulse to just tear everything down and remake society gets balanced with a respect for what already exists. The goal changes from re-education to nurturing. Then, by bringing back the liberal idea of the self, it stops trying to force happiness on people and starts to build real solidarity, one that respects everyone's individual freedom. So the outcome here is a really big shift in approach. That social impulse is no longer this compulsive, top-down force. It becomes something more organic, more about social shaping. It offers change as an invitation, not a demand. It respects people. And now for our final healing journey, the conservative pole. We're asking, how does it go from being a rigid, paralyzed fortress to something full of life and vitality? For the conservative pole to heal, it first has to let in a bit of that social perspective, the act. That means accepting that, hey, life is about movement, things have to evolve. So that impulse to just seal everything off from the outside world gives way to a commitment to healthy development. And next, it reintegrates the liberal idea of the self. And in doing so, it learns that a strong community, a real home, doesn't mean everyone has to be exactly the same. It learns to find strength in diversity instead of being threatened by it. And this creates such a powerful new vision, doesn't it? The goal isn't to get rid of tradition. It's to transform that rigid, fearful fortress into a living tradition, one that has deep, strong roots for sure, but is also flexible enough to let new branches grow. Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. What's the final result? What happens when these three poles actually start to heal and reconnect with one another? If you want to boil it all down, here it is. The core healing for the liberal pole is connection to community, to consequences. For the social pole, it's all about respect, for reality and for the individual. And for the conservative pole, the path is opening up to necessary change and to diversity. And this, right here, is why all of this matters so much. On the left, you have the state of war that's created by these isolated extreme ideologies. It's defined by plunder, compulsion, and a desire to just annihilate the other side. But on the right, the state of peace that comes from integration, well, that's a healthy, dynamic balance of three amazing values: freedom, justice, and order. So this leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? This framework, it isn't just some abstract theory. It's a tool, a mirror we can hold up to ourselves. So how can we, you and me, in our own lives, start to apply these principles of connection, respect, and openness? How can we use this to start healing the divides, not just out there in the world, but maybe, just maybe, inside ourselves too?